city was chosen. Oh, you beat me to that. Thank you. Um, so these are the three cities, and let's start with the first one, Newport. Now, Newport is near and dear to my heart because I grew up. I don't know if you can see where I'm wiggling the mouse. There's this big red splotch right there. That's where my parents' house was. I was 5 years old when we moved to Newport, and my father, we sold the house in 2013 after my father passed at age 88. So from 1960 to 2013, that was the family home. And Newport's a very walkable city. From Newport to downtown Newport and back by the beach here. And to this, my daughter and I took a walk one day. We left my parents' house. We walked to downtown Newport. We walked from downtown Newport to the beach and back to my parents' house. And it was about 50 minutes. So as I said, it's pretty small, but there's a lot of similarities between this city and the other two, which we'll talk about in a minute. Newport, one thing that was in common, it's a port city in the 1600s, early 1700s. A major political person called Cotton Mather predicted, I predict someday New York City will be bigger than Newport. Now, obviously, his prediction came true, but Newport was a major port. In fact, it was instrumental in the triangle trade, where it was Newport was getting molasses from the Caribbean, turning it into rum and sending it to Europe. Europe would buy the rum and then get goods that would be wanted on the South African coast, where they would pick up slaves, bring the slaves to the Caribbean, and then the trade continued. So Newport was very instrumental in that for a while. It also had some slave auctions. That was not something we discussed when I was a kid in school, but I have learned that since. And as I said, very walkable city. And you'll find out more similarities as I go through my presentation. The second city we're going to talk about is Copenhagen. And Copenhagen is in Denmark, very small country. But Denmark realized that it didn't have a lot. But one thing it did have was historically the Vikings. And it was a major country for doing shipping. So it owned a lot of ships and would move cargo. So a lot of the triangle trade was actually carried on Danish ships. And if anybody's ever heard of the company Maersk, which is probably one of the largest shipping companies in the country, Maersk's headquarters is, if you see where it says Castellet, Maersk headquarters is like right here where I'm trying to circle my cursor, if you can see that. But Maersk headquarters is right here in Copenhagen. So it's still a major shipping thing. Now, another reason I like Copenhagen, and I'll be going back for my third time soon, is my daughter lives in Copenhagen. She works at the University of Copenhagen. So there's incentive to go back. And the last city on the list is Amsterdam. And Amsterdam was at one time, also, as you can see, all three of these cities are very walkable, very easy to walk around and get around. Amsterdam was known for being the finance capital at one point. So those ships that were being used for the triangle trade were often financed by people out of Amsterdam. So that was, I'm just trying to give you a tie, but they're all beautiful cities. And one of the reasons we went to Amsterdam was because we figured we should see more of Europe, and my daughter agreed that she'd come to Amsterdam and visit with us if we went to Amsterdam. So those are the three cities. Now, I want you to notice in the upper left corner, you'll see a name. So as I do each slide, if you're getting lost or you zone out for a second and you say, what city was this picture in? You're always going to see the name of the city on the slide. So if you get lost, you can tell which city it is. I'm just giving you a hint. And one other question people always ask, in these presentations, so I'm just going to answer it right now. I shoot with a Nikon for this trip. These three trips, I used a Nikon D750 with a 28 to 300 lens on it. It was just a versatile walking around camera. I'll probably switch to something lighter soon, but that camera has served me well. So we're going to start with Newport. Newport is known as the yachting capital of the world. It was at one point a major port, but now there are major yachts. When I was growing up, the America's Cup was raced out of Newport. The 12-meter boats would be all in the Newport Harbor, and they'd all go out, and off the coast of Newport, they would hold the races. In fact, I had a neighbor who actually built a 37-foot yacht in his backyard. It took a day and a half to get the yacht from his backyard to the dock to load it. By the way, if I were walking that, I could have done the same walk in like 45 minutes, but on a truck holding a big boat, it took longer. And his boat was not quite that big, but this is Newport Harbor. And then again, more boats. And if you look on the left side, you'll see a cruise ship. All three of these cities are port of call for different cruise ships. Both Amsterdam and Copenhagen, I believe, have actual docks. Newport uses the tender system, where people who want to go off get onto little boats and they shuttle from the cruise ship to the port. So again, the waterfront is a very important part of Newport. Big boats, sailboats. I can't imagine the wealth involved in these boats. And so again, catching it. Now this picture is kind of interesting. That white building in the background is the Newport Yacht Club. That's the poor man's yacht club. The fancy one, which I don't have a picture of, is Ida Lewis Yacht Club, which is now the New York Yacht Club. That's the one that used to host the America's Cup. But this yacht club is near and dear to me because this is the yacht club I went to for about 5 years to take sailing lessons. So this is near and dear to me, and this is the Newport Yacht Club. And Newport is known for beaches. This is First Beach. And when you looked at the map and I said I walked to the beach, this is the beach my daughter and I had walked to. If we have any Tucker Carlson fans, you see the big, looks like a church spire in the background. That is the spire for, oh God, I'm losing the name now. St. George's Academy. It's a very fancy private prep school, and Tucker Carlson went to high school there. I also did a summer program there in oceanology. Our timelines don't overlap. I was there long before Tucker was ever there. But anyway, this is Newport, it's called Easton Beach or First Beach. There's many beaches on the island because Newport's on an island. And that cliff walk is nice. It's about 3 miles. It goes along the cliff, and most of the mansions in Newport are along Cliff Walk. And I just saw this sign, I fell in love. I said, if this doesn't give you a hint how risky it is, and there are parts of the walk which are much more risky than others. The first mile or so is fairly safe. And then I'll show you 40 steps in a second. And once you get past 40 steps, it starts getting, there are places where you feel like, I hope I live. Okay, so this is 40 steps. It's probably about 100 years old now. So it was long there before I was. And I have counted many times. Every time I've counted, there are exactly 40 steps. And it's just a path that goes down from the street level towards the cliffs. And as you can see, people will hang there. You don't go swimming there because it's kind of shallow and the waves and surf are kind of tough. So it's very dangerous to go swimming there, but people do walk around at the lower level. And it's a beautiful vantage point of the bay where the First Beach is, or Easton's Beach. Okay, so now we're switching to Copenhagen. Copenhagen, the waterfront is also important. And this is just one of the areas where we see a lot of boats. One thing I loved about Copenhagen is they really wanted buildings to be painted these bright pastel colors. And so as we're looking at a lot of buildings, most cities, usually a drab brick, or if you think of Philadelphia, you don't see bright colors like this all the time. But these buildings are incredibly bright and beautiful. So this is what they call Newhound, one of the main ports. And if you look at that row of buildings, in one of those buildings, and I can't remember which one it was, for a while was the home of a writer you may have heard of. His name was Hans Christian Andersen. He wrote The Little Mermaid, which Disney made into a movie, and a whole bunch of other children's stories. So this street in one of those buildings was where Hans Christian Andersen lived. And so this is Newhound. And it's an incredible, right now, pretty much all those buildings, the first floor of every building is either a restaurant or a shop or something, mostly restaurants. And it's crowded. This is the same street at night. And there's just boats everywhere along the harbor. I thought Copenhagen had a lot of canals. We'll see more in Amsterdam. And then this isn't actually a canal. This is actually a lake in Copenhagen. And the reason they have these lakes mainly is for flood control. So if it rains a lot, the water has a place to go. And so there are actually, I think, 5 lakes in a row. They're all man-made, but they're incredibly beautiful. And so this is the 15th story, the building my daughter actually works in. It's one of the higher buildings out there. And you're looking at towards the Copenhagen, and you can see those lakes. So the water you see here are those 5 lakes, which are mostly water control. But so this is Amsterdam. Copenhagen. I got to read my own signs. So now we're going to Amsterdam. Again, you'll notice the theme here, a lot of water, a lot of canals. This is actually actually not in Amsterdam. This is actually a suburb of Amsterdam called Gouda. Now if I were to show you the name Gouda and you were to read it, you would say, oh, that's Gouda, like Gouda cheese. Yep. We see the word as Gouda, but they pronounce it Gouda. Don't ask me to explain. And this is a small canal, again, in Gouda. And you can see that it's not very wide. But one thing you'll see in Amsterdam and in Copenhagen also is they're incredibly bike friendly. In both Amsterdam and Copenhagen, if it snows, if there's a party, bikes come first, pedestrians second, cars maybe later. Unlike Philadelphia, which is cars, and then if you're a bike, good luck. But in Amsterdam and Copenhagen, if you're a bicyclist, you rule the road and cars have to yield to you. So now we're getting back towards actual Amsterdam, and this is one of the canals. And Amsterdam actually has like a semicircle, and I think there's 4 canals, and I can't remember the name of them all, but having property on a canal was like primo property, because the way goods and services move through the town were on barges on the canals. And now, this isn't a canal, but this is Amsterdam. Amsterdam is named after the Amstel River, and there's actually a place called Dam Square, and that's where they dammed the Amstel River to tame it. So this is actually the Amstel River, and we're looking towards the direction in which would be the dam, and that's why it's called Amsterdam, name of the city. And if you've heard of Amstel Light, the beer, it's named after the Amstel River, which is in Amsterdam. And one of the things I loved was this is bridges. And so This is a traffic jam with the boats trying to go through the bridges. Amsterdam, the amount of traffic on the canals was phenomenal. The big long boat entering the bridge from our side is a tour boat. The boats with multiple people on them are typically tour boats. They have different kinds and different ways to take tours. Some are just tourist tours. Some are wine and dine tours. Some are small boat tours, but a lot of boats on the tour. And there's also a lot of boat traffic. So you can see, and if you look at the bridge, you'll see again a lot of bicycles lined up. And one of the things in Amsterdam was cars. If you notice on the left side, cars parked there. Here, you'll notice a metal pipe in front of the cars. There are places where there are no metal pipes. And every now and then, a car actually drives into the canal and they got to get it out. They also have to go fishing the canal because they find a lot of bikes in the canal too. So here we see another bridge, and you can see the bridge is just lined with bikes locked up. There's bikes everywhere. So this is again Amsterdam and the canal. Some bridges are bigger than others. When you're on a tour boat, and sometimes they'll say, everybody tuck in and duck. We're going under a low bridge. We're not responsible if you lose your hands, and do not stand up while we're under this bridge because you'll lose your head. And I was fine, but it was a little scary. It wasn't really that scary as long as you didn't stand up. Okay, so now we're going back to Newport. Another key feature that you'll find in all these cities is opulent living. Newport was known for having some amazing mansions. You've ever heard of the Astor 400 or the Society 400 back then? These were like the 400 wealthiest families. And have you ever heard the thing, you're not allowed to wear white after Labor Day? Well, it turns out what happened is the 400 wanted to make sure they were exclusive. So the way they would tell if you were actually part of the 400 or not is they said to everybody in the 400 club, don't wear white after Labor Day. So if you wore white after Labor Day, they said, aha, you're not part of us. So that's where it actually started. Anyway, this is the most opulent of all the mansions in Newport. This is called the Breakers. It was built by Cornelius Vanderbilt, who at the time would make Elon Musk. In his generation, he was probably wealthier compared to the population than Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk is compared to our population now. He was extremely wealthy. He got it railroads and shipping. Now, shipping wasn't out of Newport at this point. But Newport had the advantage of incredibly nice summer climate. My parents' house was not air conditioned, and only 1 or 2 nights a year did we ever say, "Oh, I wish we had air conditioning." The rest of the year, even in the wind, even the heat of summer, you're wearing sweaters at night. So Newport has incredible climate. The downside is it's very humid and foggy. To give you an idea how much humidity there is in Newport, we had some bushes growing in the backyard outside in the sun, and these bushes had white stuff on it. I asked my parents one, what is that? And they said, it's mildew. That's outside. The bushes got mildew. That's how humid it was. We were lucky if the fog burned off by 9 in the morning. Anyway, this is the most opulent mansion. It's open for tours. So this is the grand ballroom of the Breakers. And I was told it's basically a cube. It's 50 feet high by 50 feet wide by 50 feet long. It's a huge ballroom. And again, the goal was to impress. I think it took 3 years, and there's like incredible amounts of Italian marble and limestone and granite and amazing stuff inside. And of course, how could you have a mansion if you didn't have a grand entrance? So they built it. So this is actually going into the ballroom, a staircase. So the hosts can actually have a grand entrance into their party that they're hosting. And here's another picture of the grand staircase. And you can see it splits to the right and left. And there's a picture of the lady of the house at the top of the stairs. And if you just look at the intricate carving of the walls, that's marble that's been carved. Now, with the ballroom this big and they had a dining room, which I didn't get a picture. I have a picture. There's only so many pictures you can put in a presentation. This is the kitchen. They could prepare all these foods. I mean, like this, one of these pots here probably held like 20 gallons of soup. So they have enough to soup to serve all the people. So this is a stove, and it's not like burners like you think at your house. They have fire boxes underneath, and the whole surface on top is available for cooking. Wherever they put a pot down on the surface, you can cook. So you can have different parts of the stove, different temperatures. So now we're switching to another mansion. This is Marble House. My mother always claimed this was her favorite. And there's a lot of amazing things. It's not the biggest one, but again, it's also a Vanderbilt owned home. So they weren't the only families there, but this is the Vanderbilts. There was actually a Philadelphia family, which I have pictures of. I don't think I've included any in this presentation, but they were actually a coal magnate out of the Philly suburbs. And their house is the only one that was heated year round because the guy had unlimited coal because he owned coal mines. But anyway, how many of you have a impressive marble statue in your side yard? These people had one. And these houses are immense.
Actually, Warren does.
Okay. So this is a tea house. This is behind the marble house. So God forbid you didn't have enough room in the house. You had to build a tea house to entertain people. So the lady of the house, Mrs. Vanderbilt, built a tea house, and she was married and divorced a few times. And she actually, I think, became a countess or something by one marriage. Anyway, she built a tea house and she would entertain. And this was around the time of the suffrage. You think of, Susan B. Anthony, Alice Paul. Well, she was also a major suffrage, and she would hold lots of events out of this tea house promoting the right of vote for women. So she had china made and she just had china designed specifically for her, promoting the right of women to vote. So that was this way. And again, marble house, just like the Breakers, the kitchen's not quite as big, the dining room's not quite as big, but they had a big kitchen because they had to be able to serve. And you'll notice these are copper plaid pots. I mean, these are not cheap pots. These are very expensive pots, but they can afford it. And each of these houses had an amazing servant staff. I mean, there was typically 20 to 30 servants per house just to keep the house up and running. Okay, so we're going to switch cities now. We're going to go to Copenhagen. So this is Rosenborg. It's a major castle in Copenhagen. It's pretty much near the center of town. When it was built, it was a hunting castle that became a castle. It's easy in Denmark. You just say it's King Christian. Just leave off the number because pretty much all the kings are King Christian. So this is a major castle. It's just immense, the amount of room and space in this place. So this is next to the Copenhagen Zoo. This is just a large house right now that's used as their officer training school, but it was built as a royal residence when it was built. And if you notice on the right-hand side, there's like a tower that's connected to the Copenhagen Zoo. So I know I've shown pictures of zoos before, and when I took pictures of the Copenhagen Zoo, I was basically around that tower. Now, the building in the back, I'm not sure it's something with royalty, but these two white buildings with the green tops, those buildings are where the Queen of Denmark would wait for her royal boat to pick her up to take her via boat to wherever she was going. And there are two buildings. One of the buildings was for the Queen and her close friends, and the other one's for her less close guests. So if you were related or family, you'd be with the Queen in one of the buildings. But if you were just a person who she invited and she thought was worth coming, but she didn't really want to rub shoulders with you, you were in the other building. And this is very close to the Little Mermaid. So now we're looking at another castle, or these are palaces in Denmark. And if you look, the one on the left has 5 chimneys, the one on the right has 4 chimneys. The one on the left is more prestigious. That's where, when we were there, where the queen lived. And the one on the right is where her son, the crown prince, lived. I don't know what they've done. We'll find out when we go back, because the queen abdicated and her son became the king. And that only happened in January this year. So I don't know if they've moved residents, or they have enough servants and all that, so moving's not a problem. But they have these there's actually 4 buildings. The queen has one, the son has one, the other children have one, and there's one as a museum. And this is where you would go if you wanted to see the changing of the guard. And there's 3 different changing of the guard ceremonies. When the queen's there, there's a really fancy one. When there's royalty there, but not the queen, there's a lesser one. And when neither the queen or any royalty people there is, they have a really minuscule one, which is the one I end up seeing, but they were still impressive. And walking around Copenhagen one day, this is right outside the hotel room. This was just a horse-drawn carriage. I think it was just a trial, because the queen travels sometimes through the city on the carriage, the royalty do. And so this was a royal carriage, and the horses were just walking down the street. So now we're going to Amsterdam. Amsterdam also has royal places. Again, this was in Gouda, or you would say Gouda, but Gouda. And this was the central royal place in Gouda. And now we're looking at, this is the Royal Palace in Amsterdam. And it's interesting because most of the time it's open for tours. It's a fascinating building to take a tour, and we did. However, when they have state events, they close it up for tours, and they actually take the rooms which are being displayed as museums. And if you're a dignitary, you actually get to stay in one of these royal rooms. And again, you see that yellow van and all that. That's like people hawking goods and protests and things like that going on there. So this is the hallway. And you can see, like in Newport, you can see that, ornate carvings, paintings. I mean, they did not spare any expense when they built these buildings. And this is one of the rooms I just told you about. So this is a room you walk through. However, if they're having a royal event, if they invite dignitaries from out of town, out of state or out of country, they take the ropes away, they make the bed with real sheets, and people actually live in this room for 2 or 3 nights as the guests of the royalty of the Netherlands. So now we're switching to Jewish life in the 3 cities. And I was bar mitzvahed in this building. This is Touro Synagogue. It's the oldest active synagogue building in the United States. It's been active since before the Revolutionary War. I never met the original rabbi because that was long before me, but I was bar mitzvahed in this building in 1968. And you see it's 2 stories. The first floor is for men. The second story is for women. And if you'll notice, there's 2 doors. This main door is the entrance for the men. And this door here, and there's a staircase, is the entrance for the women. And this building, white building here, is the community center. That's where the Hebrew school was. That was across the street. So this is inside of Touro Synagogue. You can see there's my wife. She's often models in a lot of my pictures. So this is the Sephardic. And there's typically 2 main sects of Judaism, Ashkenazi and Sephardic in the United States. Most Jews affiliate with Ashkenazic, which is Eastern European. Think of Fiddler on the Roof, Poland, Germany. Sephardic is more Portugal and Spain, and along the Mediterranean. Actually, Israel is in that Mediterranean sphere, and that would also be originally a Sephardic area. The beam is in the center, and the ark is at the end. So I actually stood, I don't know if it was this original, this is long after I was there, but I would stand on that beam and read the Torah, but the Torah actually came from the back. And if you look at the back, there's 4 doors, 1, 2, 3, 4. Kind of interesting. The inner 2 doors open out, and that's where the arks are when the ark is when they, and the Torahs are when they actually are holding services. Now they close those doors up. The 2 outer doors open up, and that's where they have their showcase, like they have a Holocaust tour and ancient tours. So if you go as a tourist, the doors you'll see open are different than if you go as a worshiper. And having grown up there, I went both as a tourist and as a worshiper. Another thing that's interesting is if you look above the ark, there's the 10 Commandments, but you'll see 3 crowns. And what spared this building during the Revolutionary War is the English came in here and says, oh, crowns, they must be loyal to the British. So they didn't destroy the building. So the crowns really are something for Judaism, but the people who live there says, yeah, if you want to think they're crowns for the British and you don't destroy the building, fine with us. So that was the, and you'll notice there's 2 stories. There's actually, if you were to count in this building, there's 12 pillars for the 12 tribes. And this one did not have a lot of windows. And they told me is because the light comes from the Torah and you don't need outside light because the light comes from the Torah. Okay, so there's a close-up of the picture with the crowns above the ark. Okay, so now we're going to Copenhagen, and this is the synagogue in Copenhagen. And boy, we had to beg and plead to get into this one, but we did. And this is an Ashkenazi design because there's only the ark's in the back and the bema is right by the ark. The way we got into this one was kind of interesting. This was our second trip. I got this picture. Our first trip, we were looking for a museum called the Hirschberg, and we couldn't find it. I'm looking at the map on my phone, and it says you're like 10 feet away from, or 100 feet away from it. I couldn't find it. So I see this man walking up to us, and I said, and he had a bunch of kids with him. I said, excuse me. I says, do you know where the Hirschberg Museum is? He says, yeah, blah, blah, blah. And I noticed the man was wearing a yarmulke. So I said to the man, I noticed you're wearing a yarmulke, and I don't mean to be, whatever. Is it hard to be a Jew in Copenhagen? I says, we're Jewish, we're from America, but I was just curious what it's like to be a Jew here. So we start talking about that for a little bit. And then as the conversation goes on, he says, oh, by the way, I happen to be the head rabbi here in Copenhagen. He says, but don't get too impressed. There's only one synagogue here, and I'm the head rabbi. Okay, that was kind of cool. So next visit, we came there, and we were trying to get in, and we ran into him. He says, remember you saw us at the Hirschberg Museum and you helped us out? I says, if you could just let us see the synagogue. So he let us in. So that's how we got into this one. Kind of an interesting story. Anyway, it's a beautiful museum. Again, the pillars, the 2 stories. I don't know if they separate men and women in this one or not. I didn't get that far because we went in because this is only an active service. This is not a tourist attraction, especially with the terrorists against Jews in Copenhagen. They do not open it to the public. It's really secured. But there's the rabbi closing the ark doors, and you can see they have I guess it's a different, I'm not sure what the Hebrew says. And again, another picture looking towards the back, and you can see our is, again, 2 stories. Very common architect for synagogues in these cities, old architect. So now we're going to Amsterdam. Amsterdam, this is the Jewish synagogue in Amsterdam. It's the oldest one. It was a Sephardic synagogue. This is the entrance. And again, you'll see it's very much like the style of Newport. We have the bema in the middle, the ark in the back, and you have 2 stories, women upstairs, men downstairs, again, the chairs. And so this is the main synagogue, and it is actively used. It's mostly open for tourists, but it's also actively used for things We were there, I think, during Yom HaShoah, and they had a big ceremony. We didn't go to that. And again, this is just another view of the synagogue. And this one, you'll notice there's a lot of windows because they didn't have electricity when they built this one. There's also a lot of candelabras. I was told that it takes a little over 2 hours for them to light all the candles. So if they want to have a service at night, they got to light the candles and all the things. And it takes them about 2 hours to go around and light them all. That's how many there are. And this was in the gift shop. And who can resist seeing two Tevye's dancing? Okay, so now we're going to go back to just sort of walking around the street views of Newport. This is a Newport street. It's Eisenhower Park. The building we're looking straight at is the old Colonial House. This was originally, at one point, that was actually for a short period of time, the state capital of Rhode Island. And everybody knows the real name of Rhode Island. They recently changed it, but when I was growing up, the official name was the State of Rhode Island and Providence Plantations, with Newport, Middletown, Portsmouth, and a few other islands were Rhode Island. And the Providence area, which is most of the rest of the state, was Providence Plantations. And they both sort of went to the king and he says, look, you guys are small. You're getting one. It's charter. So it's New Rhode Island and Providence Plantations. That's how it became one state. And it's still our nation's 50th largest. So anyway, that's the old, and that's open for tours at times. So this is a building around the corner, but you can just sort of kind of see Newport is a much newer town than like what we consider old construction in the United States is new construction in Europe. And I loved, this is some of the street, this is an outdoor restaurant, with street graffiti. And just so you know, that word hope is actually the motto on the state flag. And Newport, the sign of hospitality was a pineapple because pineapples are exotic. So when a seafaring person came back from their trip, they'd have a pineapple and they put it on a pole that says, I just came back and come visit because, I have lots of stories to tell you about my adventure. So hospitality. And I love that this is just one way you could take a tour around Newport was in a classic car. You just, instead of taking a tourist bus, you would take a ride in the classic car. So now we're going to Copenhagen. Again, interesting street art. This is a relatively new building. When I showed you the pictures from the 15th floor, it was this building. This is the building my daughter works in. This is my wife looking out from the 15th floor to the city. And again, you can see the canal. I love this picture. This is walking across the bridge, and I just happened to catch it. A lot of statues and sculptures in Copenhagen. God knows how old these are, but they treasure these. And we're just walking along. It took me a while to realize, like, that's just painted on. I mean, it looks like they're really sitting there, and the perspective is so well drawn. As you're walking by, you think you're looking at something in 3 dimensions, but it's just someone who did some incredible artwork on the side of a building. I had to show you this picture. Okay. I'm not going to say any more about that picture. So we took a tour of a museum, about a 30-minute train ride north of Copenhagen. It's called the Louisiana. And we're walking through, and all of a sudden I see this. Now, everyone, if you think about this is upside down, probably recognizes that sign. If you don't recognize the sign, you're not a Philadelphia resident or a Philadelphia, Delaware Valley resident. I was sitting there like, huh? Had to get a picture. But so Philadelphia gets around. This is The Little Mermaid. Again, based on a Hans Christian Andersen story. It's one of the most visited tourist attractions in Europe. If you've seen this, you're good. You don't need to go see it again. It's really not that impressive. It's about 4 feet high. The one interesting thing is that this is one of the most terrorized, vandalized artwork in the city. It's had its head cut off a couple of times. It's been spray painted a couple of times. It's been heavily vandalized, and they've always resurrected it. It was based on a dancer, but I forget who. But they had troubles finding someone who's willing to model for it, and so they found someone to model it. So the head and the body were actually from different models. So now we're going to Amsterdam. So one of the museums we went to is the Rijksmuseum. I think that's the name of the museum. Anyway, it's a huge museum. I mean, it is like massive. It's like maybe 3 times the size of the Philadelphia Museum of Art. It's an impressive museum. But in that museum, they had a 4-story library. So this is a library, 4 stories. Probably it was huge. You can see how huge it is. And this is just a room off one of the hallways of the museum. This is just a small part of the museum. And I don't know what the rules are to get books out of there, but those are all probably very ancient books, and probably the kind like the Library of Congress where you can borrow a book, but you only can read it at the table. You can't actually take it out of the building. So we also went to Keukenhof. Keukenhof is where they do the Tulip Festival. It's 42 acres, about the same size as the Philadelphia Zoo, but it's just all tulips. And so they had this walking path, and I just happened to catch a guy who just fallen in. So he's walking along, and he must have been embarrassed because he just went into the water. And I said, "Oh," I actually had a picture of him just before this, and then I got this one. I didn't actually get the one where he fell in, but sitting there laughing. And then my wife and I said, "We're not crossing that bridge, not that way." Wooden shoes are big in the Netherlands. This is just showing how they make them. There's a whole process where they carve them, and they actually have like a model that they use to carve it out, and they actually carve it out of the wood. And the advantage of the wooden shoes are they don't fall apart as fast when you're walking on mucky ground, which most of the farmland is mucky, muddy ground. So you get them home, you bang them up, and and they dry off, and you're good to go again. So this is a protest outside the Royal Palace in Amsterdam, and this was a pro-choice rally, and so there was a lot of pro-choice things going on, and there were a lot of people holding protest signs. But I love the fact that this person didn't want a sign; she just painted her saying on her body. And if anybody reads Dutch, you can tell me what it says. I think it's something like, I don't know what it says. But anyway, she was both ladies had their protest saying written on their body, hopefully, and not permanent ink. And then bicycles big in Amsterdam, and the artwork. And I just like the way this picture came together. So now, only in Amsterdam would you need a sign reminding you no peeing in the canals. I guess that was a problem, so they actually have no alcohol zone and like no peeing in the canals. And I want to leave, this is the last slide for this show. So we were in Amsterdam, we took a museum exhibit, and I was going to read this. Not everyone who is healthy is happy, and not everyone who is sick is miserable, but those who are happy more often are less sick and live longer. Happiness protects you against heart attacks, autoimmune disorders, diabetes, cancer, and the opposite of happiness is depression. So I just want to say thank you for letting me present. My happiness is taking pictures and sharing them with them. So this was a happy experience for me. I hope you all had the same thing. And thank you. And I'm just going to turn it over to Eileen now for yours now, Eileen.
Well, thank you. Pictures were really, wow, we really traveled a lot in an hour. Woo. Are we going to open it up for, will you take a few questions?
Take as many questions as people have.
Okay, and the only thing coming from me is we're going to save the date because March 19th, Zuckerman, and he's done incredible photography. And during when COVID had sort of shut down the city, he spent some time just kind of documenting what the streets looked like at that time. And it's just an incredible reminder of what happens when there's, uh, problems. Um, and there was a comment that came in from John, your fun stories were the best part. Thanks. So, okay, some questions?
I think John, raised it.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Amsterdam, they have the Anne Frank house there. Did you get to visit that?
Okay, so let me tell you about the Anne Frank house. Once a month, they open up tickets. And I knew what day they opened up the tickets. So they opened up the tickets at 10 o'clock on a certain night, because time zone different, whatever it was. I was on there at 10:05. I put in my request for a ticket. My request got timed out. By the time I reset my browser 15 minutes later, they were sold out. So I did not get to get to tour the building. We did walk past the building. We saw it. So we walked past the Anne Frank house, but we did not actually get to go in because I tried to buy tickets and it sold out like fast because a lot of people sell tours and they the only way they can get tickets for the tours is to get them through this website also. So they bought them all up.
Oh, I had it a lot easier because I went in 1970, so I don't think that they were giving us as much hassle back then. So I
Right.
didn't have any problems going there.
So Anne Frank was born in 1929. She was born the same year as Martin Luther King and Christopher Plummer and my mother-in-law. Anyway, that's a fun story. Next question.
What's the population of each city?
Newport's, I want to say 50,000. Copenhagen, I want to say is about 400,000, and Amsterdam, I think, is about 600,000 to 800,000.
Hmm.
So Newport's a lot smaller than the other two, but I tied it in because I saw the similarities, and again, having grown up there, I connected because the similarities because I saw it. And it's also for those who want to go touring. Newport's like a 5.5, 6 hour drive from here, and the other ones are like a 7, 8 hour flight. So it's a lot easier to get to Newport.
I have a quick question, Steve. Wonderful pictures, by the way. I couldn't possibly tell you how to improve them. But in the library museum, I noticed your picture included these amazing looking spiral staircases. Were you allowed to walk on those?
If you were a guest of the library, which we were not, I mean, there's a whole separate process to get into the library. I think you would if you were in the library, I'm not sure what the rules were on that one.
And I guess I could ask the same thing about one of the synagogues. It was very big and empty looking, and there was a sign that said no entry, basically onto the main floor. I don't know what the proper term is. Would that be to separate tourists from parishioners? I don't know, or of people attending church there?
Okay, so the no entrance, okay, so that sign, no entrance, is only there when it's open for tourists.
Mhm.
When it's open as a worship space, they put the sign away.
Okay.
And then those chairs are actually occupied. And so it becomes a full service room and building. But for tourists, they put the sign there so they don't disrupt that space.
I see. And one more question or comment. I noticed the third synagogue, the mirrors, or not the mirrors, I'm sorry, the windows remind me a lot of our Gershwin Y right here in Philly. Is that a coincidence, or would you think that's intentional?
I think we're talking about this picture.
Yes.
Okay, so my guess is the Gershwin Library would have copied this one because this is older.
Okay.
But this was a major synagogue And it was an architecture. This architecture was very common for Sephardic synagogues, and a lot
Okay.
of the early Jews in the United States were Sephardic. The Ashkenazi Jews did not start coming until the pogroms, Fiddler on the Roof, or the World War II atrocities.
Okay.
The Newport Synagogue, for example, was originally founded by Sephardic Jews, which is why it was built in Sephardic style.
Thank you.
I have a question. This is May. I just want to ask, with all these beautiful pictures you have taken, did you do any post-processing?
Let's say I can't find a picture here that I did not do post-processing. Now,
Got it.
sometimes it's just a matter, because I shoot raw. So
Yeah,
when you shoot raw, you have to do some post-processing or you get nothing.
okay,
So, did I do a lot of post-processing on these? Most of these? No. Most of the time it's just a matter of adding a little contrast, blackening the blacks, whitening the whites, boosting some of the contrast, color. There was one or two that were heavily post-processed. I didn't include many pictures that I really over post-processed. Or as I think of when Morris shows his pictures, and I'm going to quote you, Morris, he says, I keep processing and editing until I say it's done. And so I love your artwork and I love the fact you do that. But so I mimic it some, but I didn't present any of those kinds of pictures in this thing.
thank you.
Yes, Stephen, I had a question for you about the house that was your family's home, and there's always reasons why you sell the houses, but I'm wondering, since it's such a beautiful place in Newport, do you ever wish you still had the home there in Newport?
Okay, so sort of, but the problem is that at the time which my father passed, I was still working full time. I had a job in the Philadelphia area. My sister had a job in New Haven, and my brother had a job. He lived in New York City. He was working in Newark. None of us were in the position to take over the house. We didn't want to leave it vacant. And it was a asset that was at the time worth selling. And the other thing is, if I were to move back to Newport, which I love to do, I probably wouldn't choose my parents' house. And the reason for me is kind of health related. I told you how much mildew there was in the backyard, and the basement was very damp. Even though it was basically above ground mostly, it was just maybe like a couple of feet below ground level. It was very damp in the whole house. I mean, we'd empty the humidifier like twice a day. And because of that, there was a lot of mold in the house, so my allergies would go nuts. So no, I didn't want the house, and neither did my brother or sister.
Well done.
Vacation was great, but the logistics were not.
Yeah.
But it was a great place to grow up. It really was.
Okay, do we have any more questions? Otherwise, we're, I think, going to say good night and wish everyone a very, 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 very good night. Very happy February. We're looking forward to March. We hope that the groundhog was right and that spring will be here very quickly.
I have a
What do you
sarcastic
do?
remark. I'll say this till the end. I know we are a group of polite and dignified people, but someone should tell the Dutch that they're pronouncing the name of that place wrong.
Which place?
Gouda. You know, how you said the spelling is like Gouda, but they pronounce it differently.
Oh, if I told you how the port of New Hound,
Yes,
a New Haven, if you saw how it was spelled, you go, huh? The pronunciation of letters is very different in Denmark and the Netherlands than what we think they should be.
I've noticed. I've never been there, but I've noticed that myself. I do a lot of historical research about the fortresses and the churches and things like that. So yeah, I probably mispronounce everything. So, thank
All
you.
right.
So
Plus,
is it,
Robert-
is, I'm sorry, is someone talking? Go ahead.
I say, in Howdah, they outnumbered us a couple of thousand to 2, 3. So we could say Gouda, there was a couple thousand people saying Howdah. We figured they won.
So Stephen, I just want to thank you. It was an incredibly enjoyable night. We just traveled here and we traveled there and your comments, your photography. Once again, Stephen, thank you, thank you, thank you. You did you did a great job, and
Thank
it's wonderful. And thank you for stepping up to February when I asked you, and you did, and thank you. It's all good. The Photographic Society pushing 161 years. It's amazing. It's just absolutely amazing. So, is it now okay to say goodnight to everyone?
Good night.
Yeah, good night.
All right.
Good night.
Thanks, Stephen. Thanks,
Good
Stephen.
night.
Thank you,